We are going to now switch gears to a new theme. This is our third theme of 4, connecting research to policymaking. And so what we wanted to do was to hear from some senior leaders from across the science and scientific society community. And we're kicking off with a conversation, a fireside chat titled The Future of Science Policy, relatively ambitious mandate that you both have here. But we're delighted to be joined by Sudip Parikh, the CEO, relatively new CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and by Cristin Dorgelo, who will be leading this conversation. She's the president and the CEO of the Association of Science and Technology Centers. Thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming them.
Great. So I don't know about you, but I'm very excited for this conversation. And I'm particularly excited in part because we are catching you so early in your tenure at AAAS. Also because I think we're riding a high on the morning conversations from old friends and new. And I count you as a new friend to this work at AAAS. I think as we move through the conversation in the next 20, 25 minutes or so, we are going to draw on your experience bridging science, policy, and industry. You know, Eric was talking about that amazing flywheel, and you are that flywheel in one person. So let's dig in on what that experience has been. I think we are also going to be thinking about your goals for AAAS, that harnesses as such a large science society, the world's largest multidisciplinary science society, what scientists can do to engage more actively in the policymaking process. So why don't we start by a big question that I would be frustrated by people asking me, which is, in a few weeks into the job, what are your top few priorities for AAAS in moving that science society, the science community forward?
No. Yeah, I'm 3 weeks into the job.
No pressure. He definitely has his agenda set.
That's right, all set. I now know where the restrooms are. I know where the conference rooms are. Everything is good. I don't get locked in the hallways anymore. I'm much more settled than I was 2 weeks ago. What I can tell you is that as a multidisciplinary organization, I'm passionate about the fact that AAAS has to take on those issues that are pan-science, right? So if it's an issue around something in biomedical innovation, which Eric spoke so compellingly about, there are organizations that lead there. And AAAS will always collaborate, will always be a partner in that. But for the issues that are pan-scientific, that are really affecting all of us who worry about science and the scientific enterprise, that is where I really hope to see AAAS lead. And so the first thing that comes to mind, and it basically forms a framework for everything else, is the fact that we are building a new global scientific culture. Nations are joining us at the frontiers of science. For the last 75 years, the United States has been an inordinately larger share of the investment in basic research and development than any other nation on Earth. And we have, through hard fought and hard won lessons, and some of them are still aspirations, we have a set of a thing that I call culture, which is research ethics, data integrity, how you treat human subjects. This has been hard won. It's been painful to get there, and so we want to make sure that as other nations join us at the frontiers of science, that we are engaging, so that we are not exporting our scientific culture, but adding to the global scientific culture the things that we've learned. Look, we want the creativity, the engine of the energetic work that's going on in other nations to be a part of that culture as well. But we want to make sure that we are engaged. And so when that comes down to policy issues, it's things like ensuring that we are a welcoming crossroads here in the United States for science. We want the best and brightest minds from around the world. It's served us well for 75 years. We want to continue that. It doesn't mean that we want to be naive about it. It doesn't mean that we want to. It means that we must protect ourselves from from the stealing of ideas or the stealing of intellectual property. But that is a thing to protect from. That is not to end engagement globally. And so we've got to walk that fine line. It's a challenge. It's going to be hard work to actually make it happen. But we have to err on the side of global engagement, and AAAS is going to be vocal about that. The other thing that leads into in terms of culture is diversity and inclusion. We again want to draw on the best scientific minds, and if we're going to leverage only half the population, or if we're going to leverage only folks from certain parts of the population, we are not going to get the full benefit of this wonderful nation that we live in. And so what we really have to do is make sure that we have mechanisms. First of all, the easy stuff. Okay, so the easy stuff, and I can tell you this, is to have a culture, and I say easy with air quotes, is you have to have a culture where people feel safe, and there's not harassment, and there's not, and that there are consequences for perpetrating those types of activities. So I call that easy because there's right and wrong there, and we have to make sure that we are advocating for policies that make those things happen. The second part is actively working to include others in the scientific process. I'm a product of that. Okay, I grew up in Hickory, North Carolina. The thought that I would be on this stage talking to you all about the scientific enterprise didn't cross my mind. It probably didn't cross my science teacher's mind. And so we have to work to make that happen. And that means people can be mentors and sponsors who don't look like you, right? And we have to make sure that we're creating those active mechanisms for bringing folks to the table in every type of science, right? We don't want to be relegated to niches because of our backgrounds. And so, if I had to choose some pan science things, those are it. I mean, there's so much going on. This is a remarkable era in science, and Eric makes that very clear in the biosciences. And so I really feel like we are in the space where it's a cliche, but it's the best of times and it's the worst of times, right? It's the best of times in that we have these extraordinary advances that are happening in every field. My kids get to hear about gene editing to cure sickle cell, or they get to hear about looking at Pluto in exquisite detail. Those are mind-blowing advances in the last 10 years. I can't imagine what's next, and so that's wonderful. But there's this challenge to us, which is that in that same era, there are more people now that believe the Earth is flat than there were 10 years ago. So you can see Pluto, but the Earth is flat. We've got to make sure that we can overcome those challenges, and part of that is by reaching out to communities and meeting people where they are. And so that's sort of the beginnings.
I love this starting place, and you and John and Eric today have each set out some really big aspirations for where we go, and at the heart of what your message has been is one of inclusion and one of participation. And I want to dig in on that. I read, because I'm a nerd for association communications, I read one of your letters to the community as you first started. And one of the notes you said in there has been sitting with me, which was that science must be integral to decision making at every policy table and every kitchen table. And that's a really important reflection at a time when science is affecting all of our lives so fundamentally, whether it's our health or the way that our community functions and how justice and equity present in those communities. And so something is going to have to change, and probably it's many things, and probably it's not just the easy things that you mentioned, to the extent to which those are easy, to make science more inclusive, to make it more just and more participatory. And this is something that I think about in my daily work a lot. And so I'm curious what you think not just the easy things are. What are the barriers that need to get busted to make science more inclusive and more participatory for all, so that it is at every kitchen table?
Yeah. Gosh,
no pressure.
Yeah, there's no pressure there at all. First of all, what I mean by that, when I say that science should be at every table, so there are so many challenges that are facing us that are transcendent, right? Whether it's climate change, or whether it's the ethics around gene editing, or 100 other issues. And so many of those are driven by choices that people make in their homes. And we as scientists and people that care about science, we can't just be sitting here in Washington talking about the policy that's going to break down those barriers. It has to be in local communities. And you're going to see AAAS already starting with some of the great foundations that were laid by my predecessors, working in the local and state level to talk about how do we bring, forget about what, people want answers to the things that are bothering them the most. So if I'm a fisherman in Alaska and climate change is affecting the number of fish that I'm catching, you know, what's causing climate change is one issue, and we can put that to the side, but science needs to be at the table to help them figure out what comes next. What's going to come next for them? And so when you do that, when you start to build that credibility and trust at the local and state level, hopefully we can rebuild some of the trust that has been lacking at the national level. So I think that it's incredibly important for us to engage, not just here, but at home. I love this thing that that Punch, our NSF nominee, has said, which is that we need to have China has the 1,000 Talents program.
Yeah.
We need to have a 10,000 Talents program because we should be actively trying to get people into the sciences. And that's not just about recruiting people from outside the country, but inside the country. I think it's wonderful that there should be scientists who are descended from people who came across in the Mayflower. I also think it's wonderful that there should be scientists who are Native Alaskan and Native Hawaiian. I think it's absolutely fantastic that there are Chinese Americans and Indian Americans who are contributing to the fabric of what we're accomplishing in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but also in Topeka, Kansas. We have to make sure that this is not something that's only isolated to the coasts. And that comes from government policies that enable us to bring people to the table that haven't been there before. But it takes leadership from the top. Because part of it is being on a bully pulpit and saying that this is a way forward for you and your families, right? If you don't hear that science is a path forward for you, you're not thinking of that. You're thinking of being a doctor or a lawyer or an athlete. That's not. We need to make sure that people see that science is a path forward, not just because you're excited about the science, but also because it's a path forward in your life, and that breaks down lots of barriers when people start to see a path. From where they are to where they want to be. That's what got me here. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about day one of the next presidential term. But I want to push us even a little further. So if we were to all close our eyes and in our post-lunch state, imagine a world in which we have made science more inclusive and participatory. We have put out that clarion bully pulpit call to action that you just talked about. And maybe it's day one of not the next presidential term, but the one after that. What is the big opportunity that you hope, if you were writing a paper for the Day One Project, what's the big scientific opportunity on the horizon that we might get done if we pull off some of this foundational cross-cutting work you're talking about?
Yeah. One of the things that one of the reasons why do we do this? Why do we do what we do? I have 3 kids. I have 3 school-aged kids. And my hope for them is that we do our work. We rise to the challenges of today that are out there, whether, again, I keep naming climate change because it's so much on my mind, but there are others as well. We rise to those challenges. We rise to the challenges that confront us as a nation, as a people, so that they can rise to their challenges. Right, and their challenges are going to be different than ours because of the very things that Eric Lander talks about. Yeah. Everything that he talked about that has a good outcome has a bad outcome, and we have to make sure that we're able to have a conversation as a democracy, as a functioning democracy, about these challenges and opportunities. We can't. The world changes so fast. From 600 to 1,000, I didn't learn any history. Right, there was nothing happened between 600 and 1,000 that was taught in my high school history class. I know, for all the historians out there, I know things happened. I learned nothing about that era because it felt like things moved very slowly. We live in an era where what happened a year ago in science is already making waves in terms of the future directions of science. We live in an era where even the technology changes so quickly. I mean, it's only been 10 years since I got my first iPhone, and now I can't go 10 minutes without reading it. So
Right.
this is the world we live in. So I think if there are things, if you ask me something specific, what's the thing that we can do?
I really asked you what your thing is.
Your
dream.
My dream is to, there's two sets of it. One is the selfish dream, which is, hey, I want to go see someplace other than Earth. That's the selfish
He's a
dream.
space fan. He's totally my people.
But if I had it, I want there to be a cure for Alzheimer's, and I don't care if it comes from Cambridge or from Palo Alto or from Suzhou. I'd rather it come from Cambridge or Palo Alto or Topeka, but I want that cure for Alzheimer's.
So let's go back to the broad for a minute here. If we're going to pull off that dream, or those couple of dreams, I love them both, and I want them to happen. We have to move beyond just the transdisciplinary conversation in science, right? So Eric spoke about being bilingual in both machine learning and in biology and genomics. We have to move beyond that to starting to talk about crossing ideological divides, crossing sector divides. You have sat on the Hill, you have sat in industry, you are now sitting squarely in the science community. How do we keep both transdisciplinary work and cross-sector work on the table, and where will that get us?
Yeah, it's hard. It's the first start, but it does require people who've sat in all those spaces, and it's possible now. In the past, you were pigeonholed. If you came up through academia,
Right.
you were squarely told stay in academia. You were a disappointment if you didn't stay in academia. That is less and less true. There's still some pockets of it, but it's less and less true. And so part of what we need is people who have actually experienced academia, understand that culture. Then we need people who've then crossed that divide and gotten to the halls of Congress or into industry. And AAAS has several programs that help make that happen. We have conversations between media and scientists as well as policymakers and scientists. We need those people that speak that language, and we have to actually give them an infrastructure in which to work. And that's the one thing I think is still lacking, which is right now it's very much by happenstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you've gotten a fellowship and you've gotten into this area. We need to make sure that we have a certain cadre of people that we see this as an actual job, right? That to know these 3 areas or 4 areas is a job.
Right.
And that you can actually make it's not a unicorn. It's actually there's a small group. It's not going to be a huge group. It's a small group of people that can drive these conversations forward and can live in all these worlds. And what we can get out of that is really important because this wonderful policy. The advocacy for the Human Genome Project is there are books written about it because of the way it happened and how it happened across election years and election cycles. That has to become not just a learning for the small few who've written their theses about it, but for a cadre of professionals who then know how to make it happen for the next great idea. And we only get that if we invest in it. Otherwise, it's happenstance. And happenstance, I don't want to trust my future to happenstance. We are competing, and we are competing with other countries. We're competing. States are competing. Look at Texas and California. There's real competition going on there between states to get scientific talent. We, as a nation, are competing for scientific talent. That culture that we're developing, hopefully it has room for infrastructure of people that cross all those boundaries and that can work in a regulatory environment, work in a technical environment where you wear a Patagonia vest, whatever environment you work in, you've got to feel that we have people that can feel comfortable. So it's an exciting time. There's so much opportunity.
Okay, so one of the answers you gave me on how to get some of this big stuff done is to have more people that cross these sectoral boundaries and who take a leap, think about alternate pathways. I know that the Day One Project is also thinking about this. It isn't just about the policy topics, but also the people that are writing these ideas and making these ideas real. Dr. Holdren spoke to the power of a 2-page memo, which those of you who know me know I love a good 2-page memo. There's some folks in the room that have written on a whiteboard kept by Kumar Garg, who spoke earlier, some tips of how to get policy work done. And so I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment, which is that for those who are following along and are thinking about a career in science policy, you served on the Hill. You probably left that and thought, boy, I wish I had known this on day one. So on day one of a science policy job, what's your tip? How do you get work done?
How do you get work done? Knowing your audience is the key, right? So yeah, the 2-page memo is really important for certain audiences, right? For some people, it's 2 sentences. I have a story I tell about my first 2 weeks in the Senate, which is that I was working for the Appropriations Committee. There was an amendment that had been offered by Sam Brownback that banned animal-human hybrids. Some of you may remember this. And the language was so broad that it banned recombinant DNA. And so I got called to the cloakroom on the Republican side. I was 2 weeks on the job. I didn't know anything. And I was asked by a Republican senator who wanted to argue against the amendment, hey, give me some examples of experiments that couldn't be possible because of this amendment. And I started talking about recombinant DNA and at that time green fluorescent protein and all the cool things you could do with that in terms of diagnostics. And he looked at me and he said, Sudip, tell me something that I can say. So we go out there. And so then I had just been briefed on this old fertility test where you take a human sperm and a hamster egg and you put them in a dish together and nothing happens, but you can test for the motility of the human sperm. And so I talked about that. And I felt really proud of myself. I thought, okay, I've got this. I've done a great job of explaining this. And he looked at me and he said, "What's a hamster?" And I said, I thought he was joking, right? So then I said, well, it's a mammal and it's bigger than a mouse and smaller than an aardvark. And then I was mad at myself because I don't know what an aardvark is. But I'd say that not because this person is not smart. As a matter of fact, they're one of the smartest people I ever met. They're busy, right? They just gotten out of a meeting on nuclear arms sales to nuclear proliferation. So we have to be careful about our audience and making sure that we are targeting what we need to say to them. The other piece I'll tell you is the difference between precision and accuracy. When you are a scientist, you want to be accurate and precise, right? And I'm talking about the classical definitions of arrows in a dartboard. When you're working in a policy environment, accuracy is incredibly important. Precision, not so much. You have to be willing to give up a little bit of that precision to make a metaphor work.
Yeah, and to be understood. Tom Cleal, who's here, often said to write to be understood in policymaking, and so that's a great lesson to share. So I'm going to try to fit in 2 questions in 2 minutes, so work with me on this one. One, to the Hill, going out from the individual working on the Hill, we need Congress to help us get these big ideas done. What's the role of Congress? How can we all contribute to helping Congress see the value of these big ideas?
The first thing is be there, right? You sometimes think that Congress doesn't listen. They listen. They listen really carefully, especially if it's in their home offices. You have to show up. Half the battle is showing up and saying things. And then if you can couple your advocacy with an outcome, the biomedical researchers have it easier because they can couple it with patients. But there's industry as well. Being able to show the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish. Nobody cared about the structure of the human ribosome, but if you say that it leads to the differences between a human ribosome and bacterial ribosome leads to antibiotics, that suddenly makes a difference, right? So you've got to be able to make that connection, but be there, show up is the number one thing with Congress.
Okay, so let's get more specific on showing up. So AAAS, one of your primary missions in the world is to advocate for science. And in the last few years, we have seen the AAAS community get super active in advocacy from a time when that was not as on deck, right? It used to not be the case that scientists lean in. If you were giving advice, not just to this community, but those online, about how to advocate for science, what would you like to see this community do to advance those goals? How can they help?
Yeah, the first thing is let me do a shout out to Rush Holt, who actually took us in that direction.
For sure. Thank you, Rush.
The second piece is for folks that are in for outside of the Beltway. When you're going to a member's office, going with that one ask is so important, and that ask needs to be. It's wonderful. It's coordinated. So I've always seen the most effective person advocating for me is someone who has a piece of language that they actually care about, and it's already spelled out for me. As the recipient of that on the Hill, there's nothing more powerful than someone with an idea, a message, and the language to implement it.
Make it easy for policymakers to help, which is what Day One Project is after. So thank you. It's been an honor to talk with you, and I look forward to what AAAS does in the years ahead.
This is great. Thank you.